And I want to thank everyone for coming. My name is Marilyn Kane. I'm an adjunct professor in the Division of Justice and Law Administration. And we have a very special presentation tonight called Finding Hope and Purpose After Incarceration. Some of you may know that we have a concentration in the Division of Justice and Law Studies of corrections and rehabilitation. And our correctional system in the United States has struggled for many years with how to correct and how to rehabilitate those who are incarcerated. And we know that America has the largest prison population in the world. According to the Vera Institute, we make up 5% of the world's population in America, and we incarcerate more than 20% of all the prisoners in the world. Most states name their prison system the Department of Corrections. So one of the questions before us tonight is, are we actually correcting and rehabilitating offenders? Vera also estimates that 90% of those who are incarcerated will eventually be released. We must also ask the question, what are we doing to prepare them to re-enter society and become productive citizens? So our two panelists tonight are Reverend Jeff Grant and Jackie Poverelli, and they're here to provide us with their insight and they'll answer those questions I just posed, as well as many others. I'd like to introduce our moderator, Dr. George Kane, the chair of the Division of Justice and Law Administration, and also husband. And Reverend Jeff Grant is an ordained minister with more than 3 decades of experience in personal crisis management, business law, prisoner reentry, recovery, clean and sober for 17 plus years, and executive and religious leadership. After an addiction to prescription opioids and serving almost 14 months in a federal prison for a white-collar crime he committed when he was a lawyer, Grant began his own reentry, earning a Master of Divinity from Union Theological Seminary in New York City with a focus in Christian social ethics. Sometimes referred to in the press as the minister to hedge funders, he is the co-founder of Progressive Prison Ministries, the world's first ministry created to provide confidential support to individuals, families, and groups with white-collar and other nonviolent criminal justice issues. And on Monday evenings, the ministry hosts a confidential online white-collar nonviolent support group. So I look forward to hearing about that, Jeff. Jackie Poverelli is the founder and executive director of Evolution Reentry Services, focusing on the needs of women who have been impacted by the criminal justice system. Poverelli has over 25 years' experience as a professional with proven successes in business leadership, mentoring, and therapeutic environments. Her experience working with trauma culminated after spending almost a year at the Danbury Federal Prison Camp for Women and observing the trauma women experience related to being incarcerated. She has since dedicated herself to criminal justice reform and reentry services with a special focus on trauma for women relating to incarceration. And she recently hosted the first retreat for women convicted of a white-collar crime in the country, which was held last month. So we look forward to hearing about that as well. And Jackie has returned to school to obtain a doctoral degree in social work with a concentration in criminal justice. Jeff and Jackie will share their journeys for the criminal justice system with us, which I'm sure will prompt more questions as the presentation goes on. And everyone will have an opportunity to ask questions a little bit later. So now I'd like to turn this over to our moderator.
Once again, thank you all for coming to tonight's presentation. Marilyn was kind enough to ask me to be the moderator for the presentation tonight. So I'm very thrilled that we have these two wonderful people here going to be sharing their stories with us, and probably a lot more than I am aware of. So without any further ado, ladies first, or Jeff, how would you like to?
that better? Hi, everybody. My name is Jeff Grant, and there's a lot written about me in this article that we passed out. And just so you know, students, the donation card there is not for you. Okay? You don't have to worry about that. I didn't actually know who the crowd was, and we have some friends of ours who have put these things together. So don't worry about donations if you're a student. If you're not a student, we expect donations. The first thing I want to tell you, before I try to get into a little of my background, is that Dr. King called us wonderful people. And for years, nobody called us wonderful people. In fact, we couldn't even call ourselves wonderful people. And that's the difference between stigma and shame. The shame I felt from my behavior and the things that I did to hurt my family, myself, my community, the lost trust of everybody in my life, including hundreds and hundreds of clients when I was a lawyer. I'll suffer that for the rest of my life. And I can speak for people who not only have been prosecuted or committed a white-collar crime. I've had a lot of experience in the criminal justice system. I was a lawyer, and I represented people in all kinds of different issues, some criminal, some civil. And then I went through the system myself for a crime I committed in 2001, and that was after 10 years of taking prescribed opioids. So I was really an early opioid person. And so it's not surprising to me that we have an epidemic the size that we have now. And I just heard on NPR the other day that they estimate the cost of the opioid epidemic to cost this country $174 billion a year. That could pay for a lot of things other than that. And I was right in the middle of it. And I don't blame anybody but myself, but it's in the story that you have on your chairs. And when I came out of prison, and we'll get to talk about prison. And by the way, the most important part of this entire evening, in my opinion, is the Q&A. Because what Jackie and I talked about in advance, and we're very good friends, by the way, and we're on a support group call every Monday night that Dr. Kane, one of you mentioned it. One of the Kanes mentioned it. And technology has allowed us to be together and form a community and come out of our isolation from all over the country. So we have a meeting on Zoom. And you know, it's pretty much like the Brady Bunch. But everybody there has either been convicted of a crime or is in the process of their legal issues. And it's amazing to come together and talk candidly, in our case, in a non-geographic setting. Because usually, you know, if any of you have ever been to a 12-step meeting, it's pretty much the people in the neighborhood, or the people who live close to it. There's a geographic center. And that's true in the inner cities, for the most part. But there's a whole area of justice that isn't so geographically centered. And that's what's kind of going on around the country in terms of the opioid epidemic in all these rural areas. And they don't have built-in support systems, and neither did we. So when I got back from prison, I volunteered for a few different justice organizations. And then I was asked to volunteer at Family Reentry, which is a large criminal justice organization here in Connecticut. And that was 2009, and they asked me to be on their board of directors. And then 7 years later, they asked me, is this working? Yeah. They asked me 7 years later to be their executive director. So I was appointed CEO of this organization. And I was the first person incarcerated for a white-collar crime in the country to be appointed as the head of a major criminal justice organization. And that is incredible if you know where we came from. It's incredible that anybody would trust us with anything. But we're on the road to earning back their respect. So we'll tell you a lot about our experience both as counselors and as people who've helped other people in trouble in a non-counseling setting. We'll talk about the criminal system, our criminal justice system here in Connecticut, if you want to talk about that. I know a lot about that. I spent 10 years at Family Reentry. We can talk about what it is to live in such a bifurcated state where the disparity of wealth causes such problems in terms of our where we allocate our resources. So, for example, in Fairfield, this is Fairfield County, right? In Fairfield County, within 20 miles of each other, are the wealthiest and poorest zip codes in the country. And what the people in the wealthy zip codes don't realize is how much they can learn from the people in the impoverished zip codes and the other way around. So that's my favorite topic, by the way. And so if you want to know what the pedigree we bring to this is, because I guess one more thing before I hand this to Jackie. I have to own my privilege right at the beginning. I have to own it. I'm a white male living in America, and things happen for me easier than women, easier than people of color, easier than people who are immigrants. I grew up in a fairly affluent suburb, and yet I wound up in prison. And then I'm paying for consequences of that for the rest of my life. We will be honest with you about every question you ask. We'll try to put no filter at all, because there's so much garbage that you see on TV or in the movies, or even people who they want to believe things that aren't necessarily true. And the reality of it is in some ways much more harsh and stark than you think, and in other ways it's much more gentle than you think. The criminal justice system is like any system. It has its good points and bad. In this country, unfortunately, it's not so much the system that's the problem, it's the scale. And we can talk about that too, because if we were only locking up 200,000 people a year in this country, we wouldn't be sitting here having an evening. The fact that it's 15 times that means that everybody's got to pay attention. So that's it for me. Let's pass it to Jackie. She'll warm you up a little bit, and then Dr. King, feel free to ask away.
I think this.
Hi, I'm Jackie Mulberry. Can you hear me? First I want to say is there are pamphlets on everybody's seats with women's names that are currently incarcerated in federal prison. I have authorization from all of them, and they would love cards, and anybody who wants to send them just follows. It is very important now. We can talk about that later. Also, I will go to what Jeff says, the donations, all the students here. I have 3 kids in college, so give that card to your parents and let them make the donation for you. So I was incarcerated for a white-collar crime. 2009, I took a mortgage out on my house and misappropriated the funds to my business. I owned a title company at the time. For a woman, I think it's a little bit different than my counterpart here, Jeff, is in today's society, there's a lot of pressure put on women to succeed. And for me, failure was not an option. I had two older brothers, and my father used to always say to me, failure is not an option. So I had a company that my entire family worked for me. I think 14 of them at the time worked for me. And my mother, my father, my husband, all of them. So when business wasn't doing so good, we couldn't close doors, in my mind. we couldn't close the doors. So I found another way. And the ramifications of that were lifelong. The guilt, the shame, everything that Jeff said is just mind-boggling. And I think for a woman, you think to yourself, wow, I'm not going to go to prison. That's not going to happen. And when the FBI came knocking on my door, I realized that was just a big fallacy, that the system, the way it is now, is it's not biased to anybody. And growing up, I just thought maybe I'd just skate right by. That doesn't happen. In fact, anybody in this room at this point in time, I would say half of this room is committing a felony every day, and you don't even know it. And in my case, it was similar to that. So I spent a year at Danbury Federal Prison, and I learned a lot. Before I went in, I had no idea what I was going for. My husband had me going to Krav Maga classes, thinking that there was going to be violence. And I had no concept. There was no one who was going to help me. There was no one that was going to tell me what was going on. So I spent time there. When I came home, I decided that there needed to be a voice for white-collar women. It's a very, very small population that is growing 20 times more than men going to prison every year. Women, the escalation of women going to prison is rising, and there's not a lot of resources out there at all for women. When I came home, being in Danbury, I'm going to be quite frank, and I'll answer anyone's questions about being there, was the easy part. The sickness I felt, I was on pretrial for 5 years. I pled guilty immediately, and I waited and waited to be sentenced for 5 years. And while I was waiting, I couldn't leave the state of Connecticut. And if I had any interaction, even if I got pulled over for going through a stoplight, I had to call my probation officer. I couldn't speak to another felon. So I couldn't even talk about my situation with anybody. If I talked to another felon, I was violating my probation or my pre-sentence release. So being in Danbury, when I finally got there, was like a aha moment. Finally, this is going to be over with. I could do this. I was in a camp. I thought it would be easy. And met a lot of unbelievable women that are spending an enormous amount of time in prison. There's one woman that is spending 33 years for a white-collar crime in prison, and I learned quite a bit about being humble and how to forgive myself and how to forgive the people that were around me. And when I came home, that's where the challenges started. And I realized I was going to be a felon for life. There's no escaping it. There's no employment. There's no housing for women when they come home. I was very fortunate. I'm self-employed. I remain self-employed. So when I came home, I started my own company again. I rebuilt that company, and I founded Evolution Family Reentry for women. I started Evolution Family Reentry for women, by women. And I work with women while they're going into prison, so they know what to expect. They know that if there's going to be violence or not going to be violence. And then I work with them when they come home. And the sad thing is we do have this white-collar support group on Monday nights, but everybody that comes to that support group needs to get permission from the probation officer, because we're not allowed to speak to each other. If Jeff and I had just gotten home from prison, I could not speak to him, or I would violate my probation. I'd go back to prison. That's one of my big things right now, is you need that support when you come home. And many, many people are missing that. So I now talk with people that are in prison. I get them ready to come home, and I let them know that reentry is the hardest part of their journey. And it's a little bit about me. Again, like Jeff said, I will answer any questions frankly, openly about prison, what it's like for a woman to go to prison, and any questions that anyone can ask.
So I think I'll begin the questions just because Jackie, you mentioned something we were talking just before about this retreat that you hosted for women who had been convicted of white-collar crimes. Could you tell us a little bit about what prompted that in you to do that, and more importantly, what happened on the retreat? What were some of the issues that, I know there might be confidentiality that you can't go into specific names or anything, but tell us how that went. Tell us how it felt. You talked earlier about, the shame that you felt, and even more so afterwards, and even when you were beforehand. So, but tell us about the retreat and how did that work out?
Well, 80% of women that are in prison now are mothers. And when they come home, white-collar women there's a stigma that we're overprivileged, we're educated. In fact, when I stood in front of the judge to be sentenced, he looked at me and he said, "You have a wonderful family," or she looked at me, "You have a wonderful family, you have an amazing education, a great business. Shame on you. You should have known better." And then proceeded to sentence me. And these women come home and they all have the same mental health issues. They're all people pleasers. None of them are able to say no. They are overachievers. They're all in the business world and they isolate themselves. So there's quite a bit of isolation when women come home. And for someone like myself, if I go and apply for a job, the first thing they do is do a background check. And any job that I'm going to apply for that has to do with finance, or they're going to do a background check, I'm going to get denied. When we come home, they can't find housing because they do a background check, a credit check, and credit is lost. So speaking to women, these women with the shame and the guilt that they feel, a lot of them lose family ties, they lose their friends, they're in their house. I decided that I was going to do a weekend where these women can find a place to just talk out their feelings, talk about what they're doing, talk about the challenges they're having, and it's never been done before, so I wasn't quite sure how it was gonna play out, but we ended up having 23 women from all over New England, and I did it in my backyard. I got a big wedding tent, we got tables, a podium, we had a big fire pit, and the women stayed Friday, Saturday, Sunday, Friday night till about 12 at night. Saturday we had an entire day session with speakers. We talked about finances, how to get back on your feet. Because by the way, banks, a white-collar felon, if you open a bank account, you have a 75% chance within 2 weeks the bank's going to shut the account down. They do not want your business. And most of these women don't even know where to put their money. They have restitution. When I came home, my original restitution was $1.8 million. I have since fought that and is now down to $346,000. But so you're paying restitution every month. Now, these women don't have a job; they still have to pay restitution. And when they do have a job, they're taking it 20 up to 20% from their pay. So the retreat went much better than I expected. I was very happy. These women felt, a lot of them had to get permission from the probation officer, so we had to go around some ties. Jeff did our morning blessing on Saturday, and it was an unbelievable sisterhood of communication and connection, and women got to forgive themselves, and we talked out feelings with their children of guilt, and that I think is the number one thing, I think Jeff will say, forgiving yourself. I've been home 4 years and I still have not forgiven myself. I still feel guilt. So it went really well. I'm very, very happy. And I'm just going to keep continuing it.
You just mentioned the importance of forgiving yourself. And it's probably no surprise to either of you that, because you found, I'm sure, that we as a society are not really a very forgiving society. And people who have done the kinds of things that you have admitted to doing there's a certain disdain and there's a certain separation that we try to create in society. And it's actually incredible if you really think about that reality. That, as my wife has said in the introduction, we call our rehabilitative or our correction system in the United States, most states, the Department of Correction. But do we really want you to be corrected? Because we hear stories like this, the success stories that maybe are unusual. You two are unusual in a lot of ways. But somehow we get mad at people like you who have turned your life around and say, you're a criminal, you're a felon for the rest of your life. How does that hit you in terms of what I'm just saying right now? How has it hit you?
It hit me the most, I think I could turn to Jeff too, is that the punishment is on our families. It is, they're the collateral damage. So for me, the damage that was done to my family and the shame that they had to go through. I had 3 children. My son was a student here at WestCon when
You're talking.
Okay. Yeah, my son was a student here at WestCon when I was in Danbury. And I had a senior in high school and my daughter was in Massachusetts. And to have them come see their mother in prison in a green outfit with big work boots on was devastating for them. And my guilt and my shame was more for that, forgiving myself. I mean, the people around me, my neighbors, I came home and I couldn't leave my house for months. My neighbor, every time I walked out of my house to do gardening, anything, he would tell me to go back inside. I was a felon. And there was no forgiveness. My church turned me away. Friends that I thought were friends were not my friends at all. And I think Jeff can talk a little bit about that as well. And today I look back and I say to myself, there is no end in sight. In 10 years from now, if you Google my name, it will come up and it will say I'm a felon. People will still know there is no, Google's not our friend. Technology is wonderful in a lot of ways, but not for, for criminals and felons. It just is something that never will escape us. So I think you have to learn to just take a breath, take a minute, and realize where people make mistakes. We aren't human. It was the first mistake I made, and I was 48 when I committed my crime, and it was the first mistake I made in 48 years. And society was not having it. Well, maybe you could probably...
Jeff, you want to go in more?
Sure. Self-forgiveness is a... well, here's the thing. We're going to get real about this, or I'm going to get real about this. Jackie's always real. Driving here today, I have a daughter and grandchildren who live in the state, and I've probably spoken, I don't know, 100, 200 times, and my kids have never been to anything I've ever spoken at. I'm allowed to, now I'm allowed, times has helped us, but for years I wasn't allowed to like photos of my grandchildren online for fear that someone might link my kid's name back to me. So driving here today, I thought, wouldn't it be great if my daughter showed up? Because we really have had her in Rochemont. We're back in each other's lives. And this voice just kept telling me, lower your expectations, because that's not going to happen. And so I just caught myself scanning the room anyway. You know, hoping for something that is just not going to happen. And that's my fault. You know, I did that. And I was a great dad. I was, you know, coached softball. I was on the school board. I owned some businesses in town where we lived in Westchester County. I was a local lawyer there. You know, it was kind of a dream trip for a kid, you know. I mean, and as far as they knew, in one day that got snatched away, and they found out that their dad tried to commit suicide, and I was in Silver Hill, trying to you know, recover from alcoholism and drug addiction. So, you know, can I forgive myself for that? Well, what choice do I have? You know, I have to show up every day. Believe it or not, my life is better now than it was then. And that's true of almost everyone we get to talk to, regardless of what the crime was, regardless of what prison they're in. I was just with two guys at an interview this afternoon. One of them served 17 years. One of them served 22 years. And they weren't treated well by the system, but they like their lives now better than before they went in. And they grew up in prison, but they didn't have a chance. So here's the thing, Dr. Kane. I think that most people who go to prison, or most people who get into trouble, have some things in common. You know, some of them are environmental. You know, some of them have to do with the environment in which you grew up in. So whether it's poverty or school to prison pipeline or the things that you hear about. But some of those things are universal, like mental illness or drug addiction. Or in my case, I talk about this all the time on our call on Monday nights. There's an Italian, expression called maleducato. And what that means literally is poorly educated. But what it really means is poorly bred. And I was poorly bred. I grew up without the character that I needed to be a successful person in life. There's a lot of reasons that happened. This is not about blaming my parents or about blaming anybody. I just think that's the epidemic. That we're not putting morals and character at the center of our being, and at the center of our education, at the center of anything. And we traded it for a lot of other things that are great. You know, tech is great, speed is great, expediency is not great. I mean, what's our fabric? What do we stand for? And I can tell you that not long after starting to practice law, I didn't stand for anything. I stood for whoever paid me. And little by little, it chipped away at my dignity. So I'll tell you a story. So I was in recovery, and in recovery, when you do your fourth step, you write a list of everyone who you resent, or everyone you harmed, or everyone you resent. So that's the fourth step, right? And then I wrote it all down, and then I had to write pages and pages of who I was going to make my amends to, and who I hurt, and who I resented. And it turned out I had 139 names on that list. And I made out my fourth step in about 3 days. So I sat there just pouring it out. And at the end of it, I did my fifth step with my sponsor, and I had to read it to him. And it took about 4 or 5 hours to read it. And what happened was the nature of my life, the things that were wrong started to line up. I started to understand why I was a liar, and why I was a cheat, and why I was a thief. And I had no idea. I thought I was a self-help coach. So that self-delusion, that self-deception is just so huge. And I just think that that's the problem. We grow up without character, or with little character, and those who grow up in loving families with good values, God bless you. I just don't know too many. Maybe it's the work I do. But to actually step away years later and have an awakening about what life is really about and what's important, and to have a life of purpose and dedicate myself, ourselves, to helping other people, it's a lot of pain, but I wouldn't trade it. I certainly wouldn't trade it for the life I have.
Ironically, as Jeff was saying, he was scanning the room looking for his daughter. My daughter and my husband are here today, and I'm feeling, how could they sit there and not be embarrassed by their mother or their wife? So I think it's ironic how both ways, it always comes back to how you're harming your family as well as harming yourself. And forgiveness, I don't know, just very difficult.
You both identified the reasons why you might have gotten into trouble in the first place. I'm interested in hearing a little bit about the things, and perhaps the most important thing that brought you out of it, after having gone through what you went through and having felt the way you did. What was the single biggest, most important thing that pulled you out? And when you talk about that, where is the hope that we have for those people that are currently incarcerated? And how do we get across to them the kind of things that they need to pull their lives together?
Well, I'll be honest, the FBI pulled me out of it. I don't know if the FBI did not come in, where I'd be today. I kind of say they're my savior, because what happened with me is you create one problem, you know, I'm just gonna fix this, and I'll figure that later, and then you're fixing this, and then you have to figure out how you have to fix this issue. And you go down a rabbit hole, the Google rabbit hole, you just go down. And when the FBI came, I was thankful that I did not have to do that anymore. That I could finally be transparent and honest, and there was nothing, I felt sick every day, this pit in your stomach that you go through every single day. And once I was incarcerated, I think for people that are incarcerated, that's the thing, is they get caught. I'm not going to sit here and lie and say I had this big epiphany that all of a sudden there was a light and I didn't want to commit crime anymore. Because in my eyes, I needed to get caught. You know, I mean, they needed to step in. And I think for women, I can only speak for women that are incarcerated now, there are many, many women who have not taken that responsibility. That's the number one thing, is taking responsibility and being accountable for the things that you've done wrong. And I do not work with any woman that doesn't take responsibility for what she's done. I think once you take accountability for yourself and responsibility for what you've done, it's so much easier to go forward. A lot of these women, I don't know, when they come home, the system is not set up. You had asked before if it was set up for rehabilitation. I really don't think so. I think the rehabilitation has to come from within, and I think that, not, but it's more of a punishment system. It's not restorative justice. I mean, my victim was the bank, so I was never put together with the bank. The bank wanted me in prison. Wells Fargo said, you're going to prison. They didn't care what I did. They didn't care if they spent thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars trying to take my house, and were upset because I was paying them and they couldn't. So there was no restorative justice there at all. I couldn't make amends with them, and the punishment was the severity of it. I wasn't rehabilitated till I came home. I mean, I was rehabilitated the minute the FBI surrounded my house. There was 15 agents that surrounded my house with my whole neighborhood videotaping it, and I was in the shower, and they knocked down the door, and I'm standing in the shower, and there's 4 FBI agents in front of me, and with guns drawn. And I'm thinking, wow, how did I get here? So that was my epiphany, I guess, right there.
The one thing I hold at the center of my life, and by far the largest, I can't remember the word you used, Dr. King. You said we were unique or different, or I can't remember what you said. And unusual. We are unusual. The most unusual thing was that, for me, was that I got sober. Because it was really the drugs and the alcohol that had so severely disrupted my life. When I came into the program, came into recovery, I found acceptance and non-judgment, and I found a way of life that I never knew about. So when I went to prison, I was almost 4 years sober. And at that point, I took responsibility for my life and responsibility for my actions. I worked the steps, and I become a member of the recovery community. I was living in Greenwich at the time. We lived in Rye and Greenwich for 30 years. And Greenwich is a kind of a cool place to go to recovery, because people walk in the door and you've seen them on TV. Some of them you've seen because they're famous, and some because they're infamous. Some you see on, singing on a TV show, and some you see on CNBC because they've been arrested. And so Greenwich is that kind of place. But when I got to prison, what they had was they had AA and NA in prison, and I was required to go to every substance abuse course class they had. And so I walked into the room the first time. There were 30 guys sitting in a circle, and that was the AA meeting in prison. And I was on a compound of 1,500 men, and I didn't go to a camp. Most people who are convicted of white-collar crimes go to federal prison camps. But I was designated to a low. And there's some reasons for that that had nothing to do with my crime or my security, my security designation. It basically had to do with the fact that there were no beds available in camp within 500 miles of my house on the day I was designated. So I had to go spend time in real prison all prisons in real prison, but with bars and control movements. And there were 1,500 men on the compound, that, of which there was one former lawyer, that was me, 2 former doctors, 5 former stockbrokers, and 1,500 drug dealers, basically. And I had to learn to cope. This is my reality. This is the deal. And I went into the AA meeting, And everyone went around the circle and they said their first name and they said their sobriety date. And because they were introducing themselves to me, I guess that was their tradition. And it became clear pretty fast that their sobriety dates were less long than the amount of time they'd been in prison, which meant they were drinking or doing drugs in prison. And I didn't even know that was possible. I knew nothing about that. And as it turns out, not one of those 30 guys had spent one day of sobriety on the street. Not one. Every single one of them, either on their way to court or on their way to the prison, depending if they were self-surrender or they were taken right out of court, or if they were locked up right away and they were in the county. Whatever day that was, they were stoned up to the moment they were in prison or in jail. So they had to detox in jail. They had to learn a way of life in jail. And the fact that these guys actually got sober in jail is a testimony to these guys. They wanted to change their life. But I had been to over 3,000 meetings at that point, and I was sober almost 4 years. And I had no appreciation for the power of that and how that would guide me through the ability to find options and choices and opportunities. And I'm happy to really talk about that because for the rest of my life, I had two goals. One was to be sober for one day at a time. The second was an awakening I had every single morning that anywhere is better than where I am today. I didn't have to have goals. I didn't have to have really direction. I just had to have the thrust, the power to move my life forward for one day. And then wake up the next morning and see where I was and then do it again. And I'm back 12 years now. I've been doing that for 12 years. And so it wasn't like I woke up when I got, when I hit my bottom and I tried to commit suicide in 2002. It wasn't like I went to bed one night as a Jewish New York lawyer and I woke up and the next day I had the idea, oh, I know what I'll do. I'll become a Catholic priest in Connecticut. There's a lot of little decisions that went into that along the way, and anything could have changed the course. Anything could have. It was a serpentine course through life, and that still goes on. Because whatever we thought our plans were, that didn't happen. And it's not going to happen. But we can live lives of peace and freedom, and we can be proud of ourselves, and hopefully not delude ourselves anymore about what the base case of life is. So I hope that answers the question.
Okay, well, we have gone for just about an hour now, and you have a very diverse audience here tonight. You have those of us who have worked or are working on one side of the fence in the criminal justice system, both faculty and others, Bureau of Prisons, and I would probably be fair in guesstimating that there are people in this room that have been affected by someone on the other side of the fence as well. So I'm interested in hearing some of the questions, comments that you might have, and I guess I'll play Phil Donahue here. Some of you don't remember Phil Donahue or Dr. Phil, but really. So I'll just go around the room, just put your hand up, and I'll give you the microphone, you can ask your question. Okay. Thank you.
You guys are to be commended for the success that you to be commended for the success that you accomplished and overcome. But I believe that there's a third component that belongs up on that stage as well, and that would be the families as a wife of a white-collar criminal. I also have been given a life sentence of living with what it's like to have someone that you love who's betrayed you into that aspect, and living behind bars. And it's not just that my life has been changed economically. That's the least of it. I belong to a group of over 100 women who are also wives of white-collar criminals. And the way in which our lives have been affected is the same as yours. The betrayal, the hitting rock bottom, the realization, the what is the point of turnaround, how do we recover, we're as unemployable at 66 to start to look for a self-sustaining income job is almost impossible. So I feel that there needs to be a third component in that discussion.
You just did. Thank you.
Just in case anyone doesn't probably realize, we all know each other. You know, it was not a surprise particularly that one of us would be in the audience. We all know each other. We've formed this kind of this community of people who are affected, whether it be family members or bad actors or whatever. And so we share a lot of information. And so I'm really glad you're here tonight. I'm not going to say your name. I'm really glad you're here tonight, and I'm really glad you put that perspective out there. And I agree with you. And by the way, there's always these choices that have to get made when you put any kind of presentation together. You put people of different genders. You put people of different races. We're just who happens to be here tonight, and we were invited, and so that's a blessing to us. But I'm sure there are many other evenings where there's all kinds of other presentations, and so this is what you got. Thanks.
You mentioned, or maybe it was Jackie, the collateral damage that's caused by what you were involved in, but that the tentacles of that involvement reach out to people like the surviving victim members that have to try to pull their lives together. And it is a really component to think about. There was a hand over here.
Yes, this first one I just wanted to relate with Jackie. First of all, my old job was a CDL bus driver. I had permission to enter the Portsmouth Naval Shipyard in Kittery, Maine, and also transport them to the secured area in Rangeley, Maine, which some of us do not know about, but it's secret. I had permission for both of those. Got laid off from that. Went to apply for a job at a two-bit grocery store. Was denied because I was a felon. I am a blessed alcoholic addict in recovery for almost 20 years. That's just thanks to the good Lord above, okay? I believe he reached down and grabbed me when I was at my wit's end. I believe he grabbed all of us at our wit's end. But Jeff, I'm really nervous asking you this question because it's really, I'm having a real hard time with this right now. I have about 2 guys I've worked with, and 2 of them I've written deposition letters for, and they're both using it now. How do you deal with that?
This is like my favorite topic in the world.
Awesome.
He's going to want for 2 hours now.
Well, the real answer, I love that we're talking about. I have some friends from recovery in the room, by the way, and I'm not going to point them out, but I love it dearly. And I can't take responsibility for anybody else's recovery but my own. But I've sponsored many men, and here's what I've learned, just in that, to try to keep it a simple answer. Before I went to prison, and I had my first sponsees. Does everyone know what a sponsee is? Is that like a weird word? Basically, so in 12 steps, what you have is a mentor and a mentee. Basically, someone who has more time sober than someone who has less. And so you take them under your wing. And there's a lot of rules about how to do that and do it with civility and to do it in a way that respects the program and respects the dignity of each other. But I had sponsees, and I was one of those, like, you know, militant sponsors. You know, you gotta do it this way, you gotta do it this way, you gotta do this. Every one of them drank. Every single one of them drank. And by the way, when I say drink, it's really kind of code for, it might be drinking or drugs. But every one of them did. And when I got back, I thought, no, I don't want to be treated that way. So instead of being that way, I just treat everyone with love and compassion and empathy and respect. And I don't try to force feed anybody. And in truth, I don't know what influence I have over them at all. I just know that a lot fewer of them are relapsing. And I think that part of that is that different types of people are seeking me out to be their sponsor, because it's not that my compassion isn't stopping them from drinking, but I think the people who are seeking me out are looking for what I have to offer. And I'm offering something different. So I'm not taking credit for it. I'm just saying that all I can do is control my behavior. And my behavior, I want to be the person that God intends me to be.
Anyone else? Any other questions? Yes. Over here, and then we'll back to the other side. Thank you.
Hi, I run the Career Resource Center at the prison, and I'd like to know what jobs are easiest for you guys to get when you get out.
I would say none.
They gotta have some kind of hope.
There's very few felon-friendly companies. When I came home, I applied for Uber. Everybody told me, Uber, go to work at Uber. They denied me flat out. No, sorry, you're a felon. I have women that have applied to Dunkin' Donuts, Walmart, Target, Taco Bell, all denied. I've had women that have gotten a job at Home Depot, have worked for 2 weeks, and they got fired because the background check came back. I push self-employment because that's what I can do. I could be self-employed. I think that it's the largest question I have from women. Do I hide it or do I be transparent? And I think the best thing, for especially in career resources, is to teach anyone that is in prison now how to tell their story, because they have to be transparent. 100%. And these women don't know how to. How do you sit there in an interview and say, oh, by the way, I've been to prison? You have to learn how to narrate that in your own head before the interview.
Thanks for sharing that, because I do some work with the folks from the FCI, with the inmates, about how to talk about your criminal past in a job interview. And the research that I've done, and the things that people that I've talked to and the things that I've read have said, you have to fit it in somewhere. Don't do it in the very beginning, and don't wait for it to do it at the end. But you got to figure out, you have to be astute enough and smart enough to pick that spot when you have a chance to tell your story, and to tell it as a story, because it's not just that you were arrested and convicted. As we've learned tonight, you know, there's a lot more to that arrest and conviction, both before and after. And it's an important story to tell. There is some legislation, you might know about this, it's called Ban the Box. What kind of an effect has that had with any of the people that you've dealt with? Because it's not consistent from state to state. Has there been success with that?
No, because there's Ban the Box where they don't have to check it off on the application, but they're going to do a background check anyway. So you're better off sitting in an interview and saying, listen, let me tell you a little bit about me. Because every interview they say, tell me a little bit about you. You know, what are your strong points? And the number one thing I say is my biggest weakness is this thing that's dragging behind me. And I'm more than that. I'm not that anymore. You cannot let that define you. And that's with women in prison. it's the hardest thing. You cannot let your bad choices prior define who you are to go forward.
Thank you.
My experience is that there are actually, the criminal justice conversation, when I first got back from prison 12 years ago, it wasn't a conversation that people were willing to have. It's not like it is now, where it's dinner table conversation, parents have that conversation with their kids, it's on the news and in the papers every night. And the conversation has changed. And in many ways, well, I don't know the criminal justice department, school particularly, but the fact that you have a criminal justice department is incredible. That people want to actually have careers in criminal justice. And nobody wants a career in criminal justice to be harsh or punitive or to be harmful to people. Everybody's there because there's some kind of inner calling. We have a range of experience that's an important part of that conversation. And more, we're being recognized as leaders who can actually bump up against that and challenge it and wrestle with things that were for so long thought about in archaic ways. Some of that is employability. The thing is that it's a really delicate balance, because people who've been away are suffering from trauma, and they don't even know how much trauma they're suffering. And yet, when they come home, the first thing they want is a job. When I get a phone call from someone, that's 50% of people say, "Can you help me get a job?" But what they're not saying is, "I need to stay sober," or "I need mental health help," or whatever the other combination of things is. They need a job, and they do need a job. But because this conversation has progressed, people are now willing to talk about these things more. And there are employers in Connecticut, for example. I was in an interview today with, the call-in was the owner of Bear's Barbecue. I guess they're in Hartford. And they hire exclusively felons. And you do find pockets of that. Now, I believe that a large driver of that is the fact that we have 3.7% unemployment, so employers are looking at other options, because you can't find people to work in your businesses or in your restaurants. You can't find people to do it, so they're changing their standard of who they're willing to accept. But to me, what that means is, if we don't work on this problem right now, when we have 3.7% unemployment, what's going to happen when the pendulum swings and we have more unemployment, and then the problem's only going to get worse?
The federal bonding program and things like that, does that help you right now?
The federal bonding program, there are training programs, and there are people who work for, let's say, for example, a painter, and people who paint or who wash the windows in your business. The reality is that a very high percentage of those people who work for that company, they've been justice involved. They've been to prison, or they have a felony, or they have a misdemeanor. A very high percentage of them. It's only the ones that are on parole, or the ones who disclose, are the ones you know about. The rest you don't. But once you get a bond, the disclosure becomes necessary from the employer. And I'm not saying that that's a bad thing. I think it's great that the bonding program is there, and a lot of people use it. And I know a lot of entrepreneurs who've been to prison, and one of the things they advertise is that all of our employees are bonded. But they have to be willing to disclose that. And then hire us for what you will. And I can just tell you, having run a work and learn program in Bridgeport 8 years ago, that people will let you wash the windows of their business, maybe if you've been to prison, but they're not going to let you wash the windows of their homes. So that's just kind of where, that's where the rubber hits the road. That their families are there. They're not letting you near it, but in the business maybe. So, you got to figure these things out. I'm just, one guy telling you my experience, but it's much better than it was 12 years ago. But as Jackie will tell you, it's not good.
There's a hand over here.
Hi, everybody. My name is Carol Cruz. I'm a person in long-term recovery. I haven't used drugs or alcohol since 1994. And I'm really, it's a pleasure to be here tonight with you guys because I identify with both your stories. My crime, though, happened, over 30 years ago. Young and naive, so I turned my mess into a message. I'm also a certified recovery coach and peer support. And I also work with returning citizens and trying to get them back to work by training them to be peers. And I really feel that, that we have sponsorship with the 12-step program, but out in the community, we don't only have peers working with the individual, we have them working with the family and preparing them for them to come home. So I started a nonprofit, the Reach Out Project. We've been kind of traveling around Connecticut, just getting our information out there. My question, though, because I heard about the collateral damage and also the effects of the restorative justice. Where do you see where I know also too? Let me just go back. So Connecticut Community for Recovery is recovery coaches in a couple of the prisons, to help with the transition. And in regards to that collateral damage, do you see that people with lived experience can really be effective in a positive way, just helping continue on with the conversation and at least connecting people to resources and also going into business and educating businesses about programs that are out there that can be very effective in hiring people like us?
I think the number one thing is you say you have coaches that are inside the prisons. But the coaches that are inside the prisons have never been in prison. So, for instance, if I send a letter to Danbury FCI, the camp, I can't go speak there because I'm a felon.
It's federal.
Yeah, federal. I'm talking federal, not state. Yeah, and that's the largest challenge. They need to have, social workers, counselors that have been in prison, speaking to the women that are in prison, that are going to come home and experience. The families, the same thing. I know my daughter speaks to other children that are going through it. She stays in connection with children that are going through it. It's great all and dandy. 20 years ago when I worked with DCF, if somebody said to me, I want you to go into Danbury and teach or counsel these women, I could do that, but I don't know what they're thinking and feeling. I don't know what they're feeling when they're being counted, when they have to stand up, and when they're visiting with their families, and there's a count in the middle of visiting. So as you're having this connection with your children, you have to now stand up so every guard can count you. And just what a count is the prisoners have to be counted to make sure you're still there in the prison, the numbers. In the camp in Danbury, when I was there, was 236 women, and there had to be 236 women accounted for at every time. So there's periodic times during the day where they're being counted, and during the night. I still, to this day, have trauma if I hear keys jingling, because at 5 o'clock in the morning, every morning, there would be sets of keys, and I would wake up immediately. If I hear keys in my sleep, I still, the trauma involved with that. And so the women, I think it's wonderful that they're doing that.
What you're saying is that you have never been exposed to a coach that has lived experience in the prison system, because they're there.
Yeah.
We work, it's been a slow process, but we're getting there. And there are people that are being hired with lived experience.
In the state system, right?
In the state and federal.
Okay.
just, you know, again, it's a funding thing.
Right.
You know, now with the opiate, you know, more funding is being provided to, you know, get people into the state and federal prisons.
Yeah. I have not had any experience with anyone that actually has gone into a prison and they are a credentialed, experienced life coach, certified coach, or a social worker or a counselor that are inside the prison.
We won't disclose that, but a recovery coach will. That's
Right.
part of our job description.
Right, exactly. But the thing about it is even in Danbury, we had one psychologist to 236 women. And his first job was a CO. He was a correctional officer before he was a psychologist. So if there was an issue going on, his first number one job was, he was a CO first, correctional officer first. Then he could be a psychologist. So you're not having inside prison, especially in federal, I'm not sure but too much about state, women that are coming in, interacting about reentry, and that's what needs to happen. They need to have reentry coaches, people that are coming out, people that can talk about the interview process.
You know, I want you to know that as a person that I care about people genuinely, I have the same problems when I hear keys or somebody running. I still feel I have that same feeling that you have. So it's not just you guys, it is the officers too that have compassion.
Yeah,
So we can help you, and I know I listen to my inmates, and I listen to what they say.
Another example of the collateral damage.
Exactly. And my inmates, I learned, they're the ones who taught me how to teach. So we do care, a lot of us. And we do listen and help.
One of the things I heard, another guy in prison say to a guard one day, a guard was making fun of him, guard, CO, was making fun of him. And he said, and the CO said to the inmate, I don't use the word inmate usually, but just so you know what I'm talking about. He said to him, well, you're going to be here for another 5 years. So the inmate said to him, I bet you're going to be here a lot longer than I am. So that's what bars around. They look the same on both sides, right? So it's a tough life. It's not for everybody. But you know, I admire people who dedicate themselves to enlighten criminal justice.
We have a question, Karen.
Hi, my name is Joe. My question is really short and simple. You guys designated white collar crime a couple of times, and I was just wondering, a criminal's a criminal as far as my eyes are concerned. But as far as reintegration goes, do white collar criminals receive more treatment than a regular everyday criminal?
Well, I'm not sure what a regular everyday criminal is, but the reason why I dedicated my life to serving the white collar community now, because I did a lot of other things, is that's who I am, that's what I know. I'm on some level trying to make amends for the mistakes I made in my life and use my experience for people. But the same is true of anything. I'm asked this question all the time. You know, why only white collar? Why only white collar are violent? Aren't people, families of people who commit violent crimes, aren't they just as important? And the answer is yes, of course. They're just as important. Everyone's important. But it's like you wouldn't go to the Women's Prisons Association and ask them, why do you only represent women? Do you represent women because women have special needs that are different from men's needs? And when you go to the Black and Latino caucus, say, why do you only represent Blacks and Latinos? The answer is because you have special needs, special things that you need. And we know what people who come home from prison and had been prosecuted for white-collar crimes, we have some things that are unique to our population. Now, there's many, many more things that are in common, many more. But there are some things that are unique. And just because it's, by the way, white-collar crime, I hate that term, hate. And we're working on alternative terms, just that the search engines in Google, you know, anyone looking for help is going to look up white-collar. But people people in our groups are all different, all different races, all different genders, all different, and they identify differently. So I don't think that there's anything special about being a white-collar criminal. But I do think, like anyone, there are some things that are unique, that are to that population.
Thank you.
Hello, thank you both for coming tonight. I really am glad I came to listen. First, I just wanted to comment on the fact that whether or not to tell an employer, I am justice involved, as you so eloquently put that. I love that. I'm going to start using that. And I've tried both ways, where you say nothing, and other thing in interviews where you're honest, and some places it worked and some places it didn't. It's just like finding someone that's understanding and saying, I'm looking for someone to give me a chance, and I'll work extra hard because of this and whatnot. But my question is, I was lucky enough to have my charge erased from my background thanks to drug diversionary programs and time served and whatnot. However, the big struggle I have is the fact that the existence of social media and Google, if you type in my name, this all pops up. I've even considered legally changing my name. It's really employers that's the problem. It's not so much like friends or family or acquaintances that bothers me. It's just the people that are really digging, which has been the employer aspect. So I have been lucky enough to have some of them erased just by contacting the organization or the newsprint company. But I also encountered some owned by big companies like USA Today, for example, owns one of the smaller companies that printed my mugshot and everything. And they say by law, they don't take down articles, even though this is 6 years ago now. And it was a relatively small thing compared to any exciting news. So you see these commercials all the time saying want your social media reputation fixed. I mean, I've never even looked into that because I just think it's BS from hearing it, but is there any avenues, I guess, with someone in my position where that is the biggest problem, just the social media aspect, the internet aspect, that you could do to get it erased? Is there any method of that, or is it just something we have to deal with? I was even thinking, is there any bills or legislation where if it's not on your record, why should it still be out there haunting you? I mean, it's not something anybody ever talks about, so I'd be curious to hear your opinion on that.
The best thing you can do is create new things, and it pushes the old stuff down. That's what I've done. If you go on Yelp, if you go on all these other, if you sign up and you keep putting yourself out there and you push the other stuff down. I mean, now if you Google my name, I think my actual charges come up on the second page, because now it's all my reentry work is coming up on the first page. I think that's all you can do at this point. I mean, I think even with, they're working on a Clean Slate Act, I don't think you could tell any company, hey, look, you have to take this off the internet. It's a terrible thing, and it is one of the things that is the most challenging. Even if there's a lot of, I know a couple women that have gotten jobs because employers do only state checks and not federal checks. But the minute somebody Googles their name, that's it. So start creating your own stuff. Make your Facebook, you hate to say it, public. Twitter, sign up for Twitter. Everything public, and it's going to start pushing everything down.
Were you pardoned in Connecticut?
No, I got in trouble in New York. But it was published in Connecticut and New York, because I live here.
Just a point that I think, since this is pretty Connecticut-centric here, I would imagine, that Connecticut is about as good as it gets for pardons, and for a lot of progressive reform. We've had a series of two excellent Commissioner of Corrections, Scott Semple and now Robert Cook. We've had great people at Office of Policy Management like Mike Waller, and people who really, really care. The biggest single problem we have in Connecticut is that we have legacy problems of debt and of other things that our legislators form. And so what happens is that the money that would otherwise be put into communities and put into the social services when people come home, the money's not there. So for anyone who needs to get a pardon, wants to get a pardon in Connecticut, it is possible. And in many, many states in this country, you can't get a pardon. Or the restrictions on getting it are just so high that it's virtually impossible. So, and congratulations for getting a pardon. That's a huge thing. Yeah, it's a huge thing.
Any questions? Any other questions?
So I understand you two talked about losing the trust of others. My question is, do you two think you'll ever win that trust back anytime in the future?
Oh, wow. That's a tough question. I would say yes. If you ask my family, if you ask me, I think I'm my worst enemy. So I'm in my own head. So in my own head, I don't think I deserve that trust. And that's with the forgiving piece. Like I said before, I mean, my family has given me back as much as I could give. It's unbelievable how they support me. But yet, if to this day, if my husband says to me, oh, can you open up a piece of mail? I do not open up his mail at all. And not because he doesn't trust me, it's because I feel like I'm not trusted.
I see.
So it's more about in my head, I think.
I think that's such a great question, actually.
Thank you.
I was about 6 months sober, and I was just so frenetic. I was so crazy that I would show up at the church where the recovery meeting was, and I would show up at like 4:30 in the morning and just sit in my car in the parking lot. And the guy who set up the chairs would open the door and to the room where the meeting was, and he would say to me, "You want to come in?" And I would go set up the chairs with him. And after a few weeks of doing that, because I would be in the parking lot every morning, he said to me, "Do you want to take over the chair commitment, to set up the chairs in the morning?" And I said, "Yeah, that'd be great. I'm here every morning." And he said, let me find out. So later that day, someone came to me who had been around that meeting a long time and handed me a key to the church. Now, they trusted me. The first entity to trust me with anything. And I actually have a key to a building, and they trusted me with it.
Nice.
It's huge. It's huge. I remember that moment, and so everything I do now is about trust and character. Am I ever going to regain everybody's trust? Not a chance.
Yeah, I understand. Those are good stories. Thank you both.
Any other questions?
Hi. So I work for the Connecticut Alliance to End Sexual Violence, and my role is specifically to help individuals who are incarcerated, detained, or any other way justice involved who are also survivors of sexual violence. So I guess my question is, in what ways can we as an organization be helpful to those who are justice involved? Because there's one, a stigma against enforcing people who are, and two, an additional stigma against those who have been violated. We currently work with a couple of reentry programs around the state, and thankfully we've been able to do different PREA regulations and work with corrections officers, but I wanted to have your take on this.
I'm on your email list, so I get it. So I see all the things that you've done. Where I was on the board of directors, and where I work at Family Reentry, with the largest caseload of domestic violence cases in the state. But what people don't really understand, or don't know, or don't realize, is that there's two sides of that. There's the abuser or the batterer, And that's what we were. So we worked primarily with men. There were very few women's cohorts where we had our contracts. But then there's the actual family services. And those two don't really go together. There's no integrated family work that's being done, that's being paid for by the state. That doesn't mean it's not, that private or individually it's not happening. And there's historical reasons for that. Personally, I believe that we need to find a way to get families together and renewed, and the siloing of help for the male spouse, big daddy, whatever it is, and the woman who's been battered. I mean, the percentages are, that's typically the way it is. It's usually male, female, not always. Right? And so cutting through that, I think, would be an amazing project. And there's all kinds of barriers, because it was like that 30 years ago. And there's reasons it's split, and there's reasons. So I think that organizations like yours have a huge role in not just in awareness, but also in actual on-the-ground programming and giving people the resources they need. And as you know, most of these families, they get back together. And so it's an abusive relationship. We run them through a 13-week program, and then they're back in the house with one another, and primarily because they don't have other options. It's not like they're independently wealthy. It's not like they can exist in two households. And if, for example, they are doing drugs together, they're each other's drug buddy. Or they're in an abusive relationship. There's a certain amount of sick comfort of being in an abusive relationship that people go back towards, that we would love to find them alternatives. And unfortunately, in some ways the world we live in, right?
There was a question back there.
Hi, my name is Mitch. I'm a recovering alcoholic. I'm just out. What I was listening, and what I was thinking was, I'm a recipient of the jail system in the state. I'm an alcoholic, and I went to Wolski in 17. And there was a counselor there who was not a counselor, she was an instructor in the class, drug and alcohol. It was a whole room, dorm of 100 plus guys for DWIs. And, I went to, different prison locations, but while I was there for 2 months, and I got a phone call that my ex-wife was trying to get custody of my special needs daughter, who was an adult, to take my guardianship away. And I was beside myself, and to say the least. And I asked to talk to one of the counselors, and I can't say enough for the people that were there that I could talk to. And when I asked to talk to the teacher, and I talked to her, and I had a whole list of the bad things about my ex-wife. I had a whole laundry list about her. She goes, what? And so I was going to go, and once I got out in 2 weeks, I had to go to the probate judge. And it was in his office. It was my daughter, my ex-wife, the judge, and my daughter's attorney. And my plan was to go in and say all the negative things that she does. Instead, because of you folks in the row in front of me, I went in there and I told him that I was a recovering alcoholic. I've made mistakes, but I love my daughter. And he says, he banged the gavel, he says, as far as I'm concerned, this meeting's over. But you'll keep your guardianship the way it is. I can't speak enough about how things have been positive for me. I had home confinement for a month after 2 months in jail. It's all been a positive thing.
another hand up I saw over here, I think?
That's why we're friends, by the way.
So, I think in closing this, I'd like to just, first of all, I was going to say before, I was going to throw a statistic out there that, you know, in a group of people this large, there's probably 20% of those who are or would be justice involved. New term I learned tonight. How about that? Justice involved. So I want to thank all of you for coming. I want to thank especially those of you who are justice involved, that were open and courageous enough to share your story and your recovery. Dear friend of mine, Sister Ellen Prejean, who I was just working with a couple of weeks ago in Ohio, has a saying that I think is really appropriate and relevant, and that is that we are all more than the worst thing that we've ever done in our lives. We all have a dignity that we're blessed with. So, Jeff and Jackie, I want to thank you very much for being with us tonight and share your stories with us and for enlightening all of